August 1945. The North Atlantic lies still beneath a sheet of low cloud, the air heavy with the smell of brine and fuel. In that muted landscape, a lone German U-boat pushes through the swell, its steel hull darkened by months at sea. The war in Europe is over, but on this gray morning, the men aboard U-977 behave as if the conflict has merely shifted shape. Oberleutnant Heinz Schäfer stands watch on the conning tower, his eyes fixed on the bleached horizon. Behind him, Berlin has fallen, the Reich has collapsed, and the Führer lies dead in a bunker hundreds of miles away. Yet here, in open water, nothing announces surrender. Only silence, and the rhythmic breathing of the diesel engines below. At first glance, U-977 is unremarkable. A Type 7C fast-attack submarine, mass-produced, modestly equipped, built to stalk Allied convoys in mid-ocean. But what sets it apart is not its design. It is the moment it disappears. After May 10th, the boat ceases to report its position. No signals, no logs, no confirmation of orders. And in the confusion of 1945, when the world shifts faster than intelligence networks can track it, one silent submarine becomes a void large enough to draw fear into its center. In London, Washington, and Ottawa, Allied commands scour the Atlantic situation reports. Most German submarines have surrendered. Some scuttled themselves in shallow harbors. Others drifted into captivity with engines barely functioning. But one vessel, U-977, fails to appear at any designated port. To Western intelligence, the absence is alarming enough. To the newly formed Office of Naval Intelligence, it sparks a wave of uncomfortable questions. Did the boat flee toward an Axis outpost? Was it carrying German nuclear research samples like U-234? Or, most disturbingly, had key Nazi officials escaped aboard it? Meanwhile, inside the submarine, the crew's world has narrowed to metal, machinery, and dim electric light. They navigate without broadcasting their presence, choosing instead a silence that feels safer than any surface signal. The surrender order that arrived in early May left the boat suspended in uncertainty. Some men whispered about Allied prison camps. Others spoke of forbidden routes whispered through Kriegsmarine corridors during the war's final months. The younger sailors waited for Schäfer to choose a path forward, each alternative heavy with fear in its own way. The collapse of the Third Reich unfolded unevenly, and beneath the sea it felt even less real. News of Hitler's death filtered through in fragments. Reports of surrender came without clarity and often contradicted each other. The old chain of command, so rigid throughout the war, fractured under the weight of defeat. U-977 became a drifting relic of an army that no longer existed, carrying a crew who struggled to interpret the world beyond the hull. Still, the ocean offered one advantage: invisibility. As weeks passed, U-977's absence became a catalyst for rumors. Intelligence officers noted unusual radio silence, while political analysts speculated about escape routes leading to South America. The world had seen U-530 arrive unexpectedly in Argentina only weeks earlier, deepening suspicions. And in a climate fueled by half-truths, even the lack of evidence surrounding U-977 became its own form of evidence. The submarine's silence created a vacuum into which imagination rushed. For the men aboard the vessel, life settled into routine survival. Water was rationed. Batteries cycled carefully. The claustrophobic thrum of machinery filled every corner of the boat, mixing with the smell of oil and unwashed clothes. The sea outside offered no signal of the world they had left behind, only a restless gray expanse that felt as empty as the future awaiting them. Each day brought another set of calculations: how far the fuel would last, how long the crew could endure submerged travel, and whether it was safer to surface or remain in the shadows beneath the waves. But the boat continued forward, and with each mile of distance from Europe, the weight of history behind them grew heavier. Not as a series of orders, but as a lingering uncertainty. The world beyond their charts had changed. Armies had disbanded, borders shifted, and nations announced victory. Yet aboard U-977, the crew remained suspended between war and whatever came after. In that narrow space of steel, silence became its own kind of momentum, pushing them deeper into waters where few answers waited. The ocean swallowed the boat's presence, leaving only unanswered questions behind. April 1945 settled over the Kriegsmarine like a long twilight. In Flensburg, the temporary seat of Germany's collapsing government, naval officers worked in rooms lit by flickering lamps and maps that no longer matched the reality outside. The once formidable U-boat fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants. Fuel existed in ration drops, enough only for brief operations. Air cover, vital for submarine transit in coastal waters, had vanished as the Luftwaffe disintegrated. Across the Atlantic, wrecked U-boats rested like metallic tombstones beneath the surface, reminders of a campaign that had long since passed its turning point. At Kristiansand in Norway, U-977 lay untouched amid this collapse. Unlike many boats crippled by mines, depth charges, and patrol aircraft, it had survived the war's escalating attrition. Its engines were intact, its torpedo tubes functional, and its crew largely unscathed. Yet this physical readiness contrasted sharply with the growing sense of abandonment that hung over the base. Crews watched neighboring submarines receive scuttling orders, commands carried out with grim efficiency as sailors opened flood valves and walked away from their sinking vessels. Then came May 4th. A message from the Oberkommando der Marine reached Kristiansand. All U-boats to cease operations. Under ordinary circumstances, such an order would have been unambiguous. But nothing in 1945 was ordinary. Communications lagged. Some commanders interpreted the order as a preliminary step toward organized surrender. Others suspected it masked an attempt to regroup for resistance in the Alps. Still others, particularly younger officers, believed surrender could mean forced labor or Soviet captivity. For Schäfer, a man shaped by duty yet aware of the war's catastrophic end, the decision was fraught. The crew sensed it. They gathered in the cramped control room as the implications settled in. The possibility of surrender to Allied forces, the fear of reprisals, and the bitter realization that Germany no longer controlled its own fate. Among sailors, rumors circulated of a distant refuge. Argentina, neutral yet sympathetic, where some believed German servicemen could rebuild their lives beyond the reach of occupying armies. The idea was hardly practical. The journey demanded a crossing of more than 7,000 nautical miles, much of it through waters monitored by Allied fleets. Supplies were insufficient. The crew was fatigued. Yet the alternative, walking into captivity just days after the regime collapsed, felt even more daunting. As Berlin fell and radio traffic disintegrated into conflicting orders, one principle remained: survival. Schäfer allowed the crew to vote, an extraordinary departure from naval hierarchy. The results were decisive. They would leave Norway, not to continue a war already lost, but to seek a narrow path out of devastation. Their decision stood in stark contrast to the hundreds of U-boats scuttled by their own crews, and to the captains who surrendered quietly in British or American harbors. Once preparations began, the crew worked with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Provisions were loaded quietly under gray skies. Spare parts were checked. The hull was inspected for damage. Every motion carried the weight of uncertainty. Some men packed a few personal belongings. Others carried nothing at all, uncertain whether any destination lay ahead. Outside, the world shifted rapidly. German forces across Europe laid down arms. Admiral Karl Dönitz attempted to negotiate limited surrenders, then faced the inevitable dissolution of the remaining command. Allied intelligence teams secured ports and interrogated U-boat personnel. A few boats attempted last-minute missions toward Japan under clandestine orders, though none reached their destination. The entire infrastructure of German naval warfare unraveled in days. On May 10th, U-977 slipped quietly from Kristiansand. No band played. No formal orders accompanied its departure. It simply vanished into the Norwegian Sea, leaving behind a base mired in confusion. The boat that left Norway that day no longer served a nation or a war. It carried only a crew who refused to surrender to uncertainty itself, and whose decision marked the beginning of one of the most unusual voyages of the entire U-boat era. When U-977 slipped quietly out of Kristiansand on May 10, 1945, it carried a crew caught between worlds. Behind them, Europe lay in smoking ruin. Ahead stretched an ocean where the war had officially ended, but whose consequences had not yet settled. The men were no longer soldiers of a functioning state. With Hitler dead, the High Command shattered, and Germany's fate sealed, they had effectively become a submarine without a nation, navigating waters that no longer recognized their purpose. Scheffer implemented a plan shaped by desperation and technical advantage. The new Schnorkel air mast, late war equipment meant to keep U-boats alive under relentless Allied air power, allowed U-977 to run submerged for unprecedented stretches. It provided stealth at the cost of constant strain. Diesel exhaust sometimes seeped back into the boat. Air remained stale. Battery cycles grew tight. Yet the system offered one priceless asset: invisibility. The Allies could not track a submarine that left no wake and transmitted no signals. Deep below the Atlantic, the crew endured a world without sunlight. Condensation dripped constantly from the overhead piping. The air carried the metallic taste of machinery and the acrid bite of diesel fumes. Men moved through the cramped compartments in routines shaped by fatigue. Watches blurred together. Meals shrank as rations thinned. Fresh water was conserved to such an extent that some sailors shaved only twice during the entire crossing. Unaware of the rumors building far above them, the men focused on survival. But outside their hull, the silence they maintained had acquired its own momentum. Allied intelligence summaries flagged the submarine's absence. Reports whispered of Nazi gold shipments, secret envoys, and unaccounted-for officials. With U-530 having appeared in Argentina earlier that summer, the idea of another rogue submarine fed an atmosphere already thick with speculation. Meanwhile, U-977 pressed southward, its engines thudding through the hull in slow cyclical rhythms. The world beyond the steel skin was undergoing rapid transformation, yet the men aboard could only guess at these changes. Radio silence kept them isolated by necessity. Each mile widened the gulf between their reality and the narratives forming in foreign capitals. By late June, Allied sonar screens showed nothing. A boat had vanished into the Atlantic's depths, and the absence itself became a source of unease. For U-977's crew, it was simply the continuation of a difficult journey. For everyone else, it was the beginning of a mystery. By July 1945, U-977's disappearance had grown into a quiet problem for Allied naval intelligence. The war had ended, but the machinery of detection, interception, and analysis remained in motion. In the headquarters of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet, officers reviewed daily patrol logs. The Royal Navy circulated position reports from destroyers sweeping the waters between Newfoundland, Greenland, and the Azores. Even Brazilian naval units, newly assertive after their wartime service, logged encounters with unidentified sonar traces near the equator. None of these reports confirmed U-977's location, but each absence mattered. The Allies had fresh memories of U-234, a submarine intercepted only weeks earlier while carrying uranium compounds intended for Japan. And in early July, U-530 had surrendered unexpectedly in Argentina, its logbooks conspicuously incomplete. Against that backdrop, another missing submarine fueled concerns that fragments of the defeated Reich were still maneuvering in secrecy. Speculation filled the vacuum. Analysts compared signal intercepts, weather patterns, and coastal sightings. Theories ranged from plausible to extraordinary. Some believed the boat might be attempting to reach Japan despite impossible odds. Others imagined a clandestine mission bearing scientific material or high-ranking officials. Argentina's historically sympathetic posture toward Germany magnified suspicions when its newspapers announced that unidentified submarines had been spotted off Patagonia. In Washington, naval intelligence compiled dossiers aligning the behavior of late-war U-boats with known escape attempts. The political environment of post-war transition heightened sensitivity. The Allies were attempting to stabilize Europe, occupy Germany, and dismantle the remnants of the Nazi regime. Any loose ends, real or imagined, were treated as potential threats. Meanwhile, in South America, rumor overshadowed reality. Reports spread of lights seen offshore, of fishermen claiming to witness periscopes cutting through the mist, and of strange vessels moving at night. While none of these sightings could be traced to U-977, they contributed to an atmosphere where speculation felt indistinguishable from fact. Amid this swirl of suspicion, the Allied search grew more urgent. More aircraft flew patrols over the South Atlantic. More destroyers combed the region. More intelligence cables crossed desks marked priority, yet the ocean remained vast, and the submarine, if it was still afloat, remained silent. At sea, a single untracked hull became an unanswered question, and unanswered questions always had consequences. On August 17, 1945, after 102 days away from Europe, U-977 surfaced beneath a cold winter light off Mar del Plata, Argentina. The men emerged slowly into the brightness, blinking after months of artificial illumination. Their faces were hollow, their movements slow, their uniforms worn to near threadbare. A white flag rose from the conning tower as Sheffer signaled surrender toward the waiting Argentine patrol vessels. But the world that greeted them bore little resemblance to the one they had left. Just days earlier, Japan had surrendered, bringing World War II to its definitive close. News of U-977's arrival spread rapidly through Argentina, carried by journalists eager for stories in the aftermath of global conflict. Headlines appeared within hours. German submarine arrives, mystery cargo from Europe, who is on board? Argentina's political landscape, neutral on paper but with deep German ties, made such speculation inevitable. Within a day, American naval officers arrived to take custody of the submarine. They moved through its compartments with methodical precision, inspecting machinery, opening storage lockers, checking torpedo tubes for unusual cargo. Logbooks were seized and studied for inconsistencies. The crew were questioned individually under hot lamps in small rooms at the naval base. Exhaustion made their answers uneven, which only fueled suspicion among investigators. What perplexed analysts most was the route itself. The logs were complete, but the journey made little strategic sense. Why had the boat taken a submerged route southward after Germany's surrender? Why risk starvation when Allied ports were days away? And why choose Argentina, a nation known for receiving German expatriates, at a moment when the rest of the world was demanding accountability for the crimes of the collapsing Reich? As newspapers amplified rumors, an information storm formed around the submarine. Some papers claimed that Nazi leaders had escaped aboard. Others insisted the boat carried advanced weapons or classified documents. A few speculated that Hitler himself might have fled. None of these claims were supported by evidence, but their persistence reflected a world struggling to make sense of a conflict whose debris had yet to settle. Sheffer held to his account. The crew fled to seek a fresh start rather than walk into captivity. But to a global audience primed for suspicion, the truth seemed almost too simple. After surrendering in Mar del Plata, U-977 entered a new phase of scrutiny. The American intelligence teams assigned to examine the submarine brought with them a methodology shaped by 4 years of submarine warfare. Nothing was taken at face value. Testimony was cross-referenced with Enigma intercepts, port reports from Norway, and known U-boat movements from the war's final weeks. Every detail became a potential clue. Interrogations stretched for weeks. Officers were questioned separately, their statements evaluated for discrepancies. One noted storm did not match meteorological data. A cited change of course lacked apparent rationale. A timeline of submerged travel seemed extreme, even for a Schnorchel-equipped submarine. Each inconsistency, no matter how small, became evidence to investigators that something more might lie beneath the surface. The geopolitical environment amplified these doubts. The Allies were actively dismantling the remnants of the Nazi regime, hunting fugitives and securing sensitive technologies. Argentina's complicated relationship with Germany only sharpened the suspicion with which American officers approached their task. They examined the torpedo room for chemical residues. They checked fuel reserves for anomalies suggesting additional stops. They scoured the radio compartment for hidden devices. Meanwhile, the Argentine press inflated every uncertainty. Sensational headlines spoke of Antarctic expeditions, secret convoys, and coded messages. Even mundane facts, such as the crew's poor physical condition, were reinterpreted as signs of clandestine missions. Sheffer's later memoir, intended to clarify the voyage, inadvertently deepened public intrigue by offering technical details that journalists wove into new layers of speculation. As weeks stretched into autumn, the investigations reached their quiet conclusion. The evidence was consistent with a long, difficult voyage undertaken by a crew determined to avoid surrender amid chaos. No high-ranking officials had been aboard. No special cargo lay hidden in the compartments. No clandestine mission had taken place. Yet the legend persisted. The absence of dramatic findings became, paradoxically, fertile ground for myth. The more ordinary the truth appeared, the more extraordinary the imagined alternatives became. And in a world emerging from the most destructive conflict in history, the line between possibility and speculation remained thin. Though the official account of U-977's voyage closed in late 1945, the submarine's cultural life was only beginning. In the early years of the Cold War, rumors found an environment ready to nurture them. Publications across Europe and South America began linking U-977 to an expanding constellation of conspiracy theories. Some claimed it had delivered blueprints for ballistic missiles to clandestine sites in Patagonia. Others spoke of Nazi gold deposits hidden deep in the Andes. A few pointed toward Antarctica, weaving the submarine into theories surrounding the remote ice fields of Queen Maud Land. The reality, however, was far more grounded. After American inspection teams completed their work, the submarine was towed north across the equator, stripped of sensitive equipment, and brought to the U.S. East Coast. At the Boston Navy Yard, engineers and naval architects examined U-977 from bow to stern. They measured hull resonance patterns to test sonar detection theories. They analyzed the Schnorchel installation, evaluating its strengths and vulnerabilities. The boat effectively became a floating laboratory for understanding the final evolution of German submarine design. For American analysts, U-977 was valuable precisely because it was intact. Many late-war U-boats had been destroyed or scuttled, leaving engineers with partial information. U-977, by contrast, presented a complete example of the technology that had challenged Allied navies across the Atlantic. Reports generated from these studies contributed to early Cold War anti-submarine warfare tactics and influenced the first design considerations for U.S. post-war submarine classes. Yet these technical evaluations received little public attention. What lingered instead were the myths, amplified by radio programs, adventure magazines, and geopolitical anxieties. The more outlandish stories found audiences eager to believe that remnants of the defeated Reich had scattered into hidden corners of the globe, carrying dangerous secrets with them. In 1946, U-977 met its final end during Operation Deadlight, the mass disposal of surrendered German submarines. Towed out into the cold North Atlantic, it slipped beneath the surface under target fire and disappeared into deep water. A simple end for a vessel burdened by so many stories. But the sinking did little to erase its reputation. If anything, it intensified the allure. A submarine lost twice, first by disappearance, then by deliberate destruction, became an ideal foundation for legend. The true story of U-977 begins not with secret cargo or hidden missions, but with a crew confronting the collapse of the world they had served. These men were young, weary, and bound more by circumstance than ideology. As Germany disintegrated in the spring of 1945, they faced the same uncertainty that gripped millions across Europe. The decision to flee was shaped by fear of captivity, fear of retribution, fear of being swallowed by the chaos that overtook the Reich in its final days. Their journey southward was not the trajectory of a covert operation, but a reflection of that fear. The prolonged submerged run, the rationed water, the stale air, the cramped compartments, each was part of a voyage defined by endurance rather than ambition. The hardships they faced aligned with the evidence found aboard the submarine: depleted supplies, exhausted machinery, a crew bearing the physical marks of prolonged confinement. The interrogations conducted after surrender revealed not conspirators, but men who had clung to the only controllable path in a moment of historical upheaval. No hidden compartments concealed secret materials. No escaped officials sheltered in aft cabins. What investigators ultimately found was consistent with the story the crew had given: a desperate attempt to carve out a future in a world reshaped overnight. When U-977 was sunk during Operation Deadlight, it carried into the depths the final traces of that story. The legends that grew afterward were shaped by the uncertainties of the post-war era, reflecting the anxieties and imaginations of a world still reckoning with the scale of the conflict. But beneath the myths lies a simple truth. U-977 was not an instrument of intrigue, but a vessel caught in the closing shockwave of a global war, steered by men seeking a way out of the ruins. In the cold expanse of the North Atlantic, where the boat now rests, its story remains suspended between history and myth. And in that quiet depth, its final dive echoes the uncertain ending faced by so many at the war's close. A reminder that sometimes the most mysterious stories are born not from secrets, but from the silence left behind.
If you've made it this far, you're one of us, searching for the truth behind the headlines and the courage behind the silence. Subscribe to the channel, and let's keep exploring the hidden wars, secret operations, and untold fates that shape the world we live in.